You smell like rain and flowers. Not really. You kind of smell like butt. What's up, noobs? Rick here. I'm going to be doing my video now about how the Portland Premier RTT went, which was my first tournament. I'm going to be going into the overall tournament, set up my matchups, my list, what I learned, and then what things I want to change about my list for the next RTT. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. I know everybody hates hearing it, but it really does help us out. And don't forget that down below, I always break down my videos into chapters, so if you don't want to listen to the whole thing, you don't have to. Like I said, this was my first tournament ever, and so I had some pre-game jitters. I didn't want to run into what I have said in multiple videos in the past is probably my biggest fear, which is just being stuck at a 3-hour game of a game that you love so much with somebody who's a complete dick or somebody who's just not fun to be with. And I gotta say, that did not happen. Everyone there that I interacted with was friendly, they were helpful, and they were more than willing to go out of their way to assist any new players. I came in 14th out of 30 players. It was actually 20 players. So, you know, not exactly a strong showing, but my only goal for this first tournament was to not come in last, and I did it. So I did not come in last. Goal accomplished. The tournament was well put on. I think it started a little late, but it's the first time that they've had an RTT since the COVID lockdowns. Tanner and Cameron were awesome organizers. The terrain was absolutely gorgeous. They are lucky to have access to some 3D printed terrain and some GW terrain, and a local game store. Guardian Games actually helped them get all of the terrain that they needed. So we had lots terrain. There wasn't anything that was like Planet Bowling Ball. There were no like plastic bins or solo cups. Everything was gorgeous. There were 4 total Green Knight players there, which is pretty interesting because I was walking around or talking with other folks, and it was interesting to hear that we were the boogeymen, or at least it seemed to be that way, when there were Freebooters lists there, and there were AdMech Flyer lists there, and there were Drakari lists there, but yet I heard so many people talking about Dread Knights and how the Grey Knights are just like an oppressive army, and I think you'll find that that didn't show up in the rankings. Stefan from One Last Blade was there, and that was the first time I actually got to meet him in person. He was delight to be around. Very, very funny. That gregariousness that is in all of his videos is not an act. That is actually him. No tacos, which is sad. However, they did provide pizza, so you know, win-win. They had a bar. Had some beer. The mission setup, I don't know if other tournaments do this, but the mission setup, there were 10 tables there total. And we had a situation where when we started our first our round, we were told what mission to rearrange the objectives into. So our first mission was Surround and Destroy, our second mission was Battle Lines, and our third mission was, unfortunately, the Scouring. But so it was on the players to go ahead and rearrange the tables for the most part. I think Cameron tried to run around and do most of it, but there was at least our third game that we had to actually rearrange anything. I was under the impression that when you went to a tournament, certain tables had certain missions, and then just when you changed tables, you would change missions. But I guess it actually worked out because my second and third mission were on the same table, table 5, if I remember right. So if that had happened to me, I would have played the same mission twice in a row, and this way at least I got to play 3 different missions, even though the third mission was the Scouring, so I would have preferred playing Battle Lines again, but you know, that's neither here nor there. So I want to quickly go into my matchups. My first matchup was against a very nice man named Warwick. It was his 4th game of 40k ever. He was playing Dark Angels. Again, this was on Surround and Destroy, and he had a setup of models that was not meta at all. When I thought Dark Angels, I was expecting lots of like Inner Circle Terminators and lots of Raven Wing bikers. He had the Raven Wing bikers, but no Terminators. I think that we only got to the bottom of turn 3 before I had almost tabled his entire army. I believe he had some Blade Guard and a Redemptor left, and that was about it. Our game took a little longer than usual because my opponent, being very new to the game, was looking up a lot of his data sheets. Warwick was a very fun guy to be around. He's just a new player. So I was helping him out. I was reminding him about buffs he had. Score against Warwick and the Dark Angels was 87 for me and 61 for him. Match number 2 was Battle Lines against Black Templar. My opponent was Max. Max was awesome. He was welcoming, he was helpful, he was so happy that I was there and that this was my first tournament. He let me take back some mistakes that I made in previous phases. And the biggest thing that he did is when I was joking with him about what the weakest parts of my game were, I was describing that it's probably actually deployment. And then what he did is he took time to explain to me his deployment, why he was deploying the way that he was, how he was stacking his auras, and then he even gave me some suggestions on how I could better deploy, and then he let me deploy that way. So for any of you that are thinking about going to a tournament but you're worried that you might not have friendly players, I'm letting you know they're out there. And Max is very much like me, where he wants to make sure that the people that are playing are getting better because it makes everyone's games better. The best games that you can play are the tight ones where you only win by a couple of points. It's not the blowout ones where you win 100 to 27, right? So by raising the entire community up and making everybody a better player, you get more competition and you get better games. So Max, thank you so much. He also taught me a lot about how to get my ass kicked. The Black Templars are pretty good right now. They don't have advance in charge, but they have very consistent advancing. They get to like advance D3 plus 3 and then they can re-roll it. They get to pick their hems. I don't know if anybody's done any research on this yet, but like at the start of any battle, they get to pick hems and they get certain buffs and then a debuff, and kind of like Admech. So against me, he picked the mini transhuman, so he couldn't be wounded on 2s, and then he got a 5-up invul for his whole army. His downside was he couldn't receive the benefits of cover. It wasn't really a big deal because his list was 2 Redemptors, some chaplain characters who I'm forgetting, Heinrich, their like chapter master. He had a couple of blobs of Assault Intercessors, Judiciary, and then he had a huge blob of, I think it was 8 Terminators with Storm Shields and Thunderhammers. And boy howdy, when you can guarantee 4-inch advance every single time that you want to move them up the board, Terminators are suddenly not so slow. I did a thing where his Terminators were advancing up the left side of my board. I had my Warlord, my Grandmaster Dread Knight up there. I tried to screen them out with some interceptors so that if he tried to charge, he'd have to go through them. But he managed to actually find a way through there to move all of his bases. And then he decided, in fact, he was agonizing over this choice. But he's like, do I make the right call, which is to charge the interceptors, kill them, and then consolidate onto the objective? Or should I rush forward, try to take out the Grandmaster, and then also the interceptors? I think he had to do a 12-inch charge, but it was only a 10 on the die because he was getting 2 to his charge, and he ended up making it on the first roll even, so he didn't even have to do a reroll. And then after that, my Grandmaster didn't do so hot. What did do hot is on the other side of the board, he also charged with the Redemptor into my other Grandmaster. I spent 2 CP, interrupted, and I punked that Redemptor. I actually learned something about how Lookout Sir works. So there's a situation where I had a Grandmaster or a Dread Knight engaged in melee. I had another Dread Knight behind it. And then up above, past the Dread Knights in melee, the Max had moved his HQ Heinrich out into the open, but he was still within 3 inches of a Redemptor Dreadnought. So it turns out that because those Terminators are engaged in melee with my Dread Knight, my other Dread Knight behind it, which was not engaged in melee, still could not shoot Heinrich because he was within 3 inches of an eligible Lookout Sir Guardian in the Redemptor Dreadnought, but yet the closest target that that the DK could theoretically engage was actually the Terminators. And this was so confusing that we actually called over a TO who sided with Max, and we looked it up in the book, and it was actually like that's the way that it works. It isn't the closest eligible target. It's just if there are any targets closer, the HQ is protected. So it was interesting to learn, and a little trick that I can watch out for and possibly even use in the future. Well, for battle lines, both Max and I chose Stranglehold as one of our secondaries. Neither of us scored very well on it because it was such a brutal game with so many models dying. Our total score, this is including the 10-point bonus, Max got 56 and I got 40. It was a complete bloodbath. So battle lines, Stranglehold, I might have to rethink my secondary strategy on that. So my third matchup was against Salamanders, who I'd also never played. So now I'm 3 for 3, 3 armies I'd never played, and 3 Space Marines chapters. Like, I legitimately only played Codex Space Marines. We got into the Scouring, and Harry, my opponent, and I were both kind of rolling our eyes because I think everybody thinks this is maybe the worst mission in the GT pack because it's 5 objectives, but they're all kind of in the middle, really close together, and your deployment zone is only a little box that's maybe 80% of your actual or your table edge. And then on top of it all is a hold 2, hold more. It's not a hold 1, hold more. So to score primary on this, it's very difficult. You have to really have a brick of an army, which Harry had, and I did not. What I learned, Harry is kind of known, I guess, in the local scene. He loves his firstborn. He had no Primaris at all in his whole list. He had a couple Ironclad Dreadnoughts. He had a couple Venerable Dreadnoughts. I think he had 3 5-man bricks of Terminators with Storm Shields and Thunderhammers. He has some tactical squads, and then he had another unit of Terminators with Cyclone missile launchers. So I made a big boo-boo here. I don't know if it was because I was full of pizza and beer at this point, or this was game number 3, but I heard Salamanders, and even though Harry ran me through his whole list, for some reason, even though there were Ironclads and Terminators with Thunderhammers and Storm Shields in this list, I thought he had a shooting army. So I was very aggressive in my turn 1. And I got myself into disadvantageous position where he was able to drop his Terminator bricks in the middle of the board. And then he got very lucky with 3 8-inch charges going off into most of my, well, 2 of my Dread Knights. Actually, 3 of my Dread Knights out of 5. So he was able to pulverize my Grandmaster because he popped all of those strats like Fury of the First, and so they were hitting on 3s, and they had a Chaplain Litany buff, and anyway, it was crazy. So my Grandmaster, just like in turn 2, I mean game 2, evaporated turn 2. I didn't screen out at all. What I should have done is I should have popped Sanctuary on an Interceptor squad and actually used them as a screen in front of all my Dread Knights, so that he would have been able, or he would have had to drop further back towards his own lines, or not dropped at all. And if he did drop and then decided to charge, the only eligible charge targets would have been the Interceptors. And then with the 4-up invul, they maybe could have tar pitted a little bit. The way I roll, probably not. It would have been the better play. Instead, I just kind of fed him 2 of my Dread Knights right at the gate. And then 1 Dread Knight managed to tar pit that 5-man one of the 5-man Terminator squads for like the rest of the game, which was pretty silly. And then my other Grandmaster, who was the real MVP of my list, though not the one that looks like me, but the other one managed to actually get in there and do some damage. He also had lots of multi-meltas on those other dreadnoughts, and as we all know, 4-up invul is pretty swingy, and so I lost 2 dread knights to multi-meltas. So at the end of the game, I had 2 models left. I had 1 strike marine that I had dropped in his backfield, gotten off a pretty clutch charge, wiped out his tactical squad holding one of his backfield objective, or one of the side, his backfield, and then I was able to take one of the other ones with my last remaining Dread Knight, which was my Grandmaster from the Sword Bearers detachment. So Harry was another excellent opponent. He's been playing a very long time. He was able to kind of coach me through some stuff. You know, he reminded me about stratagems I could use, and that game ended in a 82-37. Purifying Ritual and Raw did work for me, but again, I chose Stranglehold, and just with having to hold 3 out of the 5, everything being in the middle, all 5 are like really close, it was just hard to hold on to that, especially against those bricks where he just had Terminators with Storm Shields. And, so they have effectively a 1-up save. He did laugh, actually, because my list has 2 10-man groups of interceptors with swords. He was actually saying that against his Terminators, that was actually the sweet spot, which is true. And he kept assuming I had halberds, which was not true. But against Space Marines, as we know, that strength 5 and the -3 AP on the swords is kind of like an awesome sweet spot. Thank you, Harry. And thank you, Max, and thank you, Warwick, for excellent first games. Even though I didn't place as well as I would have hoped, I did succeed in my goal of not getting that wooden spoon. So I will definitely be back. Before I get into my new list and the changes that I want to make, I just want to go through my old list real quick. So remember, I signed up for this just a few weeks before the event actually happened. I had to paint up 2 Dread Knights, or build and paint 2 Dread Knights and 20 Interceptors and 2 Tech Marines. So the only bit of this list that I didn't have to make was build was my 15 Strike Marines and 3 Dread Knights. So I had a Prescient Brethren Patrol with a Grandmaster Dread Knight with Hammer of Righteousness and the Sigil of Exigence and the Gem of Inoktu. So I never remembered to use the gem, not even once. And the one time I was thinking about it, I was trying to gate a unit in my game against a Black Templar player, Max, and he just used the 4-up instant deny strat anyway, so it wouldn't have mattered how high I managed to get that roll anyway. But I want to point this out because I end up changing this warlord a lot in my new list. I also had a Brotherhood Tech Marine with Sanctuary and Divination and the Foretelling of Locust. The Foretelling of Locust is amazing. Still the best 30 points I think we can spend on the whole codex. Never leave home without it. It's incredible. Then I had 3 5-man strike squads. I normally started 2 of these guys in Deep Strike in almost all of my games, and they all have halberds. Nothing's crazy there. I then have 2 10-man 4-sword interceptor units. Know now that I should have built these guys with the halberds. Not only do I like the halberds more from a modeling standpoint anyway, they also are better into a lot of the meta armies out there like Drakari and Admech, Orcs, and Sisters. So, and then who knows, the new Custodes are all probably toughness 5 still. We'll see. So halberds are still kind of in that sweet spot. I'm actually building 10 more right now, but they'll have halberds. That's the end of the Prescient Brethren Patrol, and we move into my Sword Bearer's Spearhead. So this is pretty standard. I've got another Tech Marine. This is my guy that had warp shaping. And then I had a Grandmaster. This is the MVP of my list from this game. And he was just the standard second Grandmaster we see in a lot of lists. He had the Unyielding Anvil, which came in handy multiple times. Cannot recommend that Warlord trait enough. And then I had my 3 other normal Dread Knights, all maxed out. They all had the teleporter, they all had the great sword, and they all had both the Gatling silencer and the heavy psi cannon. Like I said, some of it was the models I had versus the models I could build, and overall I had a great time, honestly. So even though I lost, I learned a lot, and I think that that's an important aspect of the game. For the updated list, I'm going to be running more or less the same kind of thing. Changes are, though, however, on my Grandmaster in Nemesis Dread Knight, I'm going to drop the gem of Intoku, Noctu, in something, in Noctu. Anyway, back for Servant of the Throne. Servant of the Throne is that 3-up invul for 1 turn once a game. It's very good. And it's something that I actually remember to use versus the gem, which I consistently forget to use because I'm not very good at this game. My Brotherhood Tech Marines, I made a slight change to both of them. So I quickly realized that having warp shaping on 1, which I only used maybe once in 2 of the games and not at all in my first game, having that on 1 Tech Marine while the other one has both Divination and Sanctuary is a terrible idea. Because what I want is I want to be able to cast Sanctuary almost every turn, and I want to be able to use Divination almost every turn, but Divination is a psychic action. If I do that, I can't even spend 1 more CP to cast a power. So I move that around, so now my warp shaping Tech Marine has Divination, and the other one has Sanctuary. So hopefully I can see more play out of that. On my Grandmaster in the Nemesis Dread Knight, I'm also going to be dropping Hammer of Righteousness for Demon Slayer. I realized that in my second and my third game, Hammer of Righteousness didn't really matter much at all, because in the second game, nothing could be wounded on 2s in the first place thanks to the Black Templar Hem, and then in the third game, my Grandmaster just got blown up anyway and never made it into melee. So I want to instead play with Demon Slayer, which will give me 1 more attack. Kind of on the fence about this. I feel like 1 more attack and then, which means 2 more for sweeping. And then if you ever run into any demons, they just don't get their invul, which is pretty nice. It could really be obnoxious on the field. So I'm going to give that a shot. I know that there's some play here I could use first into the fray instead, make some of my other charges shorter. My original idea with this Grandmaster was that he'd be shunting and gating and moving all over the place and being annoying, kind of like on his own. So I don't really know if first in the fray would be that great, but I'm willing to play it. I then have just 1 unit of strike Marines now. I still have my 2 units of 10 interceptors, and then where things really changes here in the sword bearers detachment. 1 of my Dread Knights, I'm going to drop the sword off of entirely, so they'll just be fists, and then I'll also drop the teleporter, which gives me enough points, dropping those 2 strike squads from my Prescient Brethren unit to have enough points for another 10-man unit of interceptors. They're so fast and they're so good on the charge, and the board presence is so good that I want to bring more of them. So this is the way that I could fit in that third with the whole rule of 3. This will give me 30, so I can combat squad them. It'll be fantastic, I think, to have these extra interceptors versus those 2 units of strikes. I'm also thinking that I could maybe drop the teleporters and or maybe not the teleporters, but at least the melee weapons off the other two normal Dread Knights, which would give me some more points to play with. That would give me enough for a unit of servitors to do actions like banners or rod. But what it could also do is it could give me enough points to play with more wisdom of the prognosticars upgrades. So turning off Overwatch or firing on a unit that's coming in from Deep Strike. So in conclusion, I'm super curious to hear in the comments down below what you guys think of my old list, what you guys think of my new list, how you guys think I maybe should change this list. I'm definitely thinking about going to other RTTs in the future. There's another one planned for December. Don't know if I'll be able to make that one, but I'll try. And then I know that these guys, Tanner and Cameron, they're hoping to have more RTTs. They want one every month, I think is their goal. And then every 3 to 4 months, they want a GT. It sounds like they have lots of experience doing this, and they're trying to bring the RTT and the tournament scene back to the Portland area. So if you're in the Pacific Northwest, think about coming up to one of these events because they're well put on, and I had a ton of fun. With that said, again, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and call your mother. You guys done? You all done?